If someone had told me a year ago that my marriage would implode in a single night, I might have laughed. Not out of disbelief, but because back then my life felt so solid, unshakable even. I was that guy, married for over a decade, steady job, loving wife, dreams of fatherhood, Sunday hikes, homemade lasagna nights, laughter that filled the walls. But nothing prepares you for betrayal, and certainly not the kind that happens in your own bed. There's a type of silence that hits right before your world explodes. An eerie calm, like the seconds before a storm tears the roof off your home. That was the silence I lived in. Just days before the truth came crashing through everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the woman I once believed would grow old beside me. Her name is Rachel. She was my world. We met in a moment of serendipity at a bookstore in Seattle, both of us reaching for the same copy of The Alchemist. That's how the story began, and in those early days it felt like the universe conspired to bring us together. I was drawn to her laugh, her wit, the way she looked at the world like everything still had magic left in it. We fell hard and fast. In hindsight, maybe too fast. Rachel had a softness to her, a quiet beauty that never tried too hard, and I was just an ordinary guy with a soft belly and a quiet dream to build something real. We got married in the fall, surrounded by leaves that seemed to glow gold just for us. We built a life filled with little rituals, morning coffees, Friday night movies, shared dreams of one day adopting a child. We weren't perfect, but we were solid, or so I believed. Everything shifted the day I got a routine checkup. What I thought would be a standard doctor's visit turned into a terrifying wake-up call. I was borderline diabetic, my cholesterol was through the roof, and I was teetering on the edge of hypertension. My body was warning me, and it was screaming. I sat there in the sterile clinic, staring at numbers that spelled out a future I never imagined for myself. That night, Rachel held me tight and said, "We'll get through this together." That was the beginning of our transformation. We changed our diets, cut out sugar, joined a high-end gym in Miami after moving there for Rachel's freelance gigs. I dropped nearly 70 pounds in under a year. I went from soft to lean, from invisible to noticed. Rachel too changed. She was already beautiful, but now she turned heads everywhere we went. She embraced the new her with a confidence I hadn't seen before, and at first I loved it. Watching her glow felt like a shared victory. That's when Jake entered our story. He was the personal trainer at the gym we joined, chiseled, charming, and overly familiar with everyone. The type who never wore sleeves and whose laugh was just a bit too loud. I didn't like him the moment I met him, but I kept that to myself. He worked there. It was normal, or so I tried to convince myself. Jake took a special interest in Rachel. First, I told myself it was just professional. He flirted with everyone, right? Didn't mean anything. But I started noticing things. The way he'd always find a way to help her adjust her form during squats. The way her laugh sounded different around him. More alive, more flirtatious. One afternoon I caught her watching him as he did chest flies shirtless, and she bit her lip. I looked at her, and she quickly looked away. I laughed it off, told myself I was being paranoid. But paranoia doesn't creep in without reason. It needs seeds, and the seeds had already been planted. Things changed between us after that. Subtle at first. Less eye contact, shorter kisses. Conversations that used to flow became clipped, functional. I'd send her memes and stories from work, and she'd reply with one-word answers. I told myself she was just tired, stressed, busy, but I could feel her slipping away, inch by inch, like sand through my fingers. When I finally brought up my concerns, she laughed, said I was being jealous, immature, that Jake was just a flirt and I was overthinking it. That stung, because deep down I already knew. I just didn't have the proof. So we switched gyms, but by then it was too late. The distance between us had grown too wide. We were orbiting different stars, and then came the change in schedules. I got a promotion that required me to work mornings, and Rachel, well, she kept her gym sessions in the afternoon, alone, where Jake still worked. Our communication broke down completely. I tried therapy, alone. She refused to come, insisted I was the problem, that I was the one with trust issues, and maybe she was right, but only because she had given me every reason to start questioning everything. There's something particularly cruel about being betrayed by someone you'd gladly walk through fire for. I still remember how she looked on our wedding day, the way she whispered forever during our vows. And now I couldn't even remember the last time we laughed together. I started losing sleep. I'd stare at the ceiling, wondering who she was texting, wondering why she smiled at her phone but rarely smiled at me anymore. I stopped eating. My body shrank, but not from health. This was heartbreak. wrapped in anxiety and smothered in silence. I checked her phone once. Nothing. I checked again. Still nothing. She was too smart for that. Deleted everything. I even checked her GPS history, work, gym, home. Every single time. It all looked clean, but it felt dirty. I knew something was wrong. I just couldn't prove it. Then came the day our building's security guard mentioned Rachel had a masseuse visit while I was at work. A man, blonde, athletic, sounded familiar. The pieces started to align, and a new silence crept in. Not the silence of peace, but the silence before war. And I knew without a doubt, the woman I once believed would never lie to me had been lying all along. I just didn't yet know how deep the betrayal would go, or how far I'd be willing to go to reclaim the version of myself I lost along the way. This isn't just a story about infidelity, it's about how easy it is to lose yourself when the person you trust most becomes a stranger, and how hard but necessary it is to find your way back, not to them, but to you, because sometimes the person who breaks you is also the one who forces you to rebuild from scratch. Stronger, wiser, unshakable. And this was only the beginning. Rachel had grown masterful at playing two roles. One, the loving wife who left notes in my lunch and reminded me to drink water. The other, a shadow that slipped away every afternoon with carefully constructed alibis and dead-eyed affection. I hadn't known the full scope yet, but I could feel her pulling away like an anchor line slowly unraveling, and I was the one sinking. After the security guard mentioned the blonde masseuse who came to our condo, the way he said it with a smile, casual, innocent, I nodded like it was nothing, but inside my world tilted. I asked him again, "You sure he came to see Rachel?" He laughed, said, "Of course, third time this month. You've got a lucky wife. That guy's good." I smiled, excused myself, walked away with my lungs tight. Jake. It had to be Jake. That night I didn't confront her. I sat in the spare room scrolling through her social media, looking at photos she hadn't posted in weeks. A few old gym selfies, a cake she baked. Nothing suspicious. Her smile was still there, but her eyes, they looked distant now, like she was halfway to another life. In therapy I started talking less about us and more about her. My therapist, a quiet woman with sharp eyes, asked me, "Why are you so focused on saving this marriage when she's clearly not in it with you?" The question hit like a punch, because I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. A week later I switched tactics. I asked for help from a friend at work who lent me his car. I waited for Rachel outside the gym's mall. She had told me she had a class that afternoon, but she never entered the gym. Instead I saw her park. Then moments later Jake walked up to her car. They hugged. They laughed. She touched his chest. He kissed her forehead, and they walked away together. I followed them for 2 blocks until they entered a quiet residential building. I tried to follow, phone in hand, but the concierge stopped me at the lobby. "Can I help you?" he asked. I smiled, playing dumb. "Lovely couple who just came in. Do you know them?" He nodded. "Newlyweds, I think. Don't know much else." Newlyweds. I wanted to vomit. I tried calling Rachel. No answer. I called again. Nothing. I walked back to the mall, to her car, trying to make sense of it all. That's when I noticed her phone buzzing on the dashboard. She'd left it behind. That's why her GPS and messages were always clean, because the real action happened when she was unreachable. That night we slept in the same bed, her breathing soft beside me. I stared at the ceiling. Everything was different, but she didn't know I knew. Not yet. Over the next few days I dug deep. I synced her phone to my laptop while she showered. The messages were cryptic, conversations with a contact named Amanda, talking about meeting at the office, grabbing files from the desk, and the boss being out. Except Rachel didn't work in an office. She freelanced from home. The next evening, I told her I tested positive for the flu and would stay with my parents. She kissed my cheek and said, "Feel better." No hesitation, no sadness, just relief. I drove away, circled the block, and parked out of sight. I watched as she opened the door for Jake 10 minutes later. My breath caught. My heart felt like it was being crushed in a fist. I waited 10 more minutes, then returned, phone in hand, recording. Their clothes were in the living room. I heard music, and laughter, and then moaning. When I opened the bedroom door, Rachel screamed. Jake froze. He was behind her. Her eyes were wild, panicked, not with guilt but fear. Jake went aggressive, stepping toward me, naked, telling me to leave. I didn't. I kept filming. I told him to get out. I threw his clothes at him. My hands shook, but my voice was steady. That's what betrayal will do. It'll sharpen you into someone you barely recognize. I sent the footage to my lawyer. He replied immediately, "This is your ticket out." That night, Rachel begged. She cried. She said it was a mistake, that she didn't mean for it to happen. But I wasn't listening anymore. Something in me had broken. Not just the marriage, not just the love, but the illusion that I was ever enough for her. It was the beginning of the end, and the storm that had been brewing quietly for months had finally struck land. The day began like any other. A forgettable Tuesday in late spring, with the Miami sun filtering through the blinds and the hum of the ceiling fan filling the silence of our apartment. Rachel was already dressed when I walked into the kitchen. She handed me coffee like she always did. She smiled. She kissed my cheek. If guilt was hanging on her breath, it didn't show, but I had already set things in motion. That morning, I wasn't just sipping coffee, I was holding the final calm before everything in our lives combusted. I had taken the day off work without telling her. Rachel thought I was headed downtown for a client presentation. Instead, I parked a borrowed car half a block from our building, dressed in a hoodie and cap like some low-rent detective. I wasn't proud, but I was determined. I'd been spiraling for weeks, devoured by suspicion, gaslit by the woman I had loved for more than a decade. I needed to know. I needed something concrete. Not just the ache in my gut or the way my name felt foreign on her tongue. I needed the truth to punch me in the face. And it did. At 3:17 p.m., Rachel pulled into the parking lot of the same upscale shopping center where the gym was located. The one she supposedly hadn't visited in months. My chest tightened as I watched her step out of the car. Her posture confident, her smile radiant. She looked happy. That was the worst part. She looked happier than she had in months. Happier than she ever looked around me anymore. Then Jake showed up. He wore a black t-shirt that clung to his body like skin. They didn't notice me from my vantage point, but I saw everything. They laughed. They kissed. Not a friendly peck, no. It was the kind of kiss that sucked air out of lungs, the kind that once belonged to us. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. My stomach turned. They walked off hand in hand toward a side street I hadn't noticed before. I followed them from a distance, filming on my phone as discreetly as I could. They entered a residential building that looked expensive, modern, minimalistic, quiet. When I tried to follow, the doorman stopped me. I made up a story about being a friend, just hoping for a glimpse. The doorman chuckled. "They just moved in," he said. "Sweet couple. Newlyweds, I think." That word shattered something inside me. I returned to the parking lot. Rachel's car sat there like a monument to betrayal. I peered through the window and noticed her phone sitting on the center console. Of course. That's why her GPS history never betrayed her. That's why her texts always seemed harmless. She left her phone behind because the Real story lived elsewhere, in a hidden apartment, on stolen time, in moments that didn't involve me at all. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even pretend to. Rachel came home just before dinner, humming some tune under her breath. She dropped a bag of groceries on the counter and asked if I wanted stir-fry. I told her no, that I wasn't feeling well, that I might be coming down with something. She touched my forehead, feigned concern. I told her I'd sleep in the guest room just in case. She didn't protest. At 11:43 p.m., I heard her giggling in bed. I imagined her thumbs flying across the screen of her phone, probably texting Jake, telling him how easy it had been, how clueless I was. My chest felt like it was splitting open. I stared at the ceiling fan, counting every rotation like it was a heartbeat. I was past crying. Grief had calcified into numbness. The next morning, I told her I'd be staying with my parents. Blame the flu again. She smiled, almost relieved. I left before she could kiss me goodbye. My dad met me outside, and we waited in a nondescript sedan parked around the block. My brother sat in the back, clutching a D-cellar like a weapon. We were all quiet, watching and waiting. Rachel didn't wait long. Less than half an hour after I left, Jake pulled into the lot. He walked casually, carrying a gym bag. When he rang the buzzer, Rachel opened the door instantly. No hesitation. No nerves. She was ready. I didn't rush. I wanted her to feel safe. I wanted her to let her guard down. I wanted her to believe I was gone, because only then could I catch her in the truth. At 12:26 p.m., I slipped the spare key into the lock and pushed the door open. I didn't slam it. I didn't shout. I walked in slowly, letting the sounds guide me. A song played faintly from the bedroom. Then I heard it, laughter, then a moan. My hands shook as I raised my phone, already recording. As I reached the bedroom door, I paused. My breath hitched. I wanted to run. I wanted to burn the apartment down. I wanted to scream, but I did none of those things. I opened the door. They didn't notice me at first. Rachel was on all fours, Jake behind her. Their clothes were scattered like confetti from a party I wasn't invited to. Then Rachel saw me. Her scream was instant. She scrambled for the sheets, hiding herself in the panic. Jake stood up, naked, and puffed his chest like some primal idiot. "Get out, man," he barked. "Just walk away." I didn't. I raised my phone and zoomed in on his face. I said nothing. That scared him more than yelling ever could. "Stop recording," he shouted, stepping toward me. I struck first, a swift open palm to the throat just like I'd seen in a movie. Jake stumbled, coughing, clutching his neck. I pointed to the door. Out, I said. Now! I threw his clothes at him as he scrambled. Rachel begged me not to make a scene, but the scene had already been made. It was etched into memory, tattooed into my soul. Jake didn't even look back as he ran out. My dad and brother stood outside, just as planned. My father blocked the exit. Trespassing, he said calmly. We could press charges. Jake muttered something about suing me. My brother laughed in his face. Inside, Rachel stood trembling, wrapped in a blanket. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, like a child caught in a lie she couldn't spin her way out of. I sat on the couch and waited. Why? I asked finally. Why him? Why this? She cried. Of course she did, but it wasn't the kind of cry that begged for forgiveness. It was the kind that begged not to be judged. It just happened, she said. It didn't just happen, I replied. It was planned, repeated, hidden. She reached for me. I recoiled. I told her a lawyer would be in touch, that she should start looking for a place to stay, that whatever version of us once existed was dead. Then I said the hardest thing I'd ever had to say. I don't hate you, but I'll never love you again. That night I didn't cry. I sat in the guest room, staring at the same ceiling fan, thinking about all the tiny betrayals that led to this colossal one. And in the stillness I realized something. I wasn't broken, I was awake, and the rest of this story, my story, was just beginning. The hours following that devastating confrontation felt surreal, like I was floating outside my own body watching someone else's tragedy unfold. Rachel was gone. Jake had vanished into whatever shadows cheaters retreat to when exposed, and I was alone in the home we built together, standing in the middle of what used to be our life, surrounded by pieces of a reality I no longer recognized. The apartment was quiet, eerily so, as if even the walls didn't know how to breathe without her laughter. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't cry either. The kind of pain I felt had passed tears. It was a hollowing ache, like grief coated in shock. I stayed in the guest room, the same one I'd started sleeping in weeks before D-Day, and stared at the ceiling. At some point I must have dozed off because I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing. Messages, missed calls. Rachel. She texted apologies, long ones, pleas for forgiveness, promises that she would change, that it was a mistake, that she didn't mean to fall for Jake. But none of it mattered anymore. I couldn't unread the truth or unsee what I had witnessed, and while I didn't respond, I kept reading every message. That was the part that hurt the most. Even in betrayal, part of me still wanted to understand her. My father came by in the morning. He brought coffee in silence. We sat on the balcony together, both knowing what had happened without saying it aloud. Eventually he said, "You can either let this define you or refine you, but either way you can't stay in the middle." That was the moment I decided I wouldn't let this break me. Not entirely, not forever. Rachel moved out 2 days later. I didn't watch her pack. I didn't want to see her folding away the remnants of our marriage like it was seasonal clothing. But I did hear her crying. Loud, messy sobs muffled behind the door of what used to be our bedroom. I didn't comfort her. Couldn't. Not because I hated her, but because I couldn't pretend anymore. My presence would have felt like permission, and she didn't deserve that. When the door clicked shut behind her for the last time, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the space she once occupied. That's when the first tear fell. Not because I missed her in that moment, but because I finally realized what I had been holding in, years of trying to be enough, of working harder to be lovable, of swallowing doubts and burying pain. It all came flooding out and I wept. Not for her, for me. I started therapy the following week. This time, not because Rachel said I needed it, but because I knew I did. My therapist, Dr. Ellis, was direct and kind. She didn't coddle me, but she didn't let me sink either. We talked about grief, about identity, about how betrayal cuts deeper when it comes from someone you built your world around. We talked about anger too, and how sometimes it's not about vengeance, it's about survival, about reclaiming space where you once felt powerless. I also took a leave of absence from work. I needed time, not just to recover, but to process. My company was understanding, and surprisingly, so were my coworkers. Word had spread. Miami isn't a small town, but communities form in the most unexpected places. One of my colleagues, Nate, offered me his beach condo for a week. "Get out of the apartment," he said. "You need to breathe somewhere else." So I went, and for the first time in what felt like years, I let myself do nothing. I walked barefoot on the sand. I watched sunrises. I journaled. I stared at the waves until they blurred with my thoughts. And there, under the wide open sky, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: freedom. But healing isn't linear. When I returned home, the ache was still there. Softer maybe, but present. The apartment felt emptier than before. Every corner still held her scent, her shadow, her echo. I decided I couldn't live there anymore, so I called a realtor and listed the place. I didn't want to keep sleeping in a museum of memories. During that same week, I finally shared the video with my lawyer. His reaction was immediate. "This is what we needed," he said. "This will change the nature of the divorce." Until then, I hadn't even said the word aloud. Divorce tasted like ashes, like something dead and rotting in my mouth, but now it felt like liberation, like a chapter closing so a new one could begin. Rachel fought it, of course, first with tears, then with promises. She asked to meet, and against my better judgment I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe near the bay. The same one where we once celebrated our anniversary. She looked tired, smaller, defeated, but the moment she saw me, her eyes filled with something that looked like hope. "I miss us," she said. "I know you don't believe me, but I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I told her that intent didn't matter anymore, that she may not have meant to destroy our marriage, but she did, that love without loyalty was just a word. She reached for my hand and I let her touch it, briefly. "I forgive you," I said, "but I won't forget, and I won't stay." Her tears fell then, silent and slow, and for the first time in months I didn't feel like saving her, because I was too busy saving myself. After that meeting I blocked her number, not out of spite, but because the story was over and it was time I stopped rereading it. I focused on rebuilding. I returned to the gym. Not the one Jake worked at, but a new one far from downtown. I started running again. I picked up kickboxing. I cooked my own meals. I redecorated my new place with colors I never used before. Brighter ones, lighter ones. I bought bookshelves and filled them with stories of resilience and rebirth. I bought a dog. An old rescue named Max who loved long walks and quiet nights. He grounded me, gave me purpose on the days I still couldn't breathe. Eventually, friends started introducing me to people again, women who were kind, funny, curious, but I wasn't ready. I smiled, I chatted, I even went on a few casual dates, but my heart was still bruised. It hadn't stopped beating, but it hadn't forgotten how it was broken either. One night, after a group dinner, my friend Olivia pulled me aside. "You know," she said, "you're not broken, you're just rebuilding. Don't rush the paint job before the structure's secure." I laughed, but she was right. In the months that followed I did more than heal, I evolved. I took a leadership course at work and finally applied for the promotion I had once delayed. I got it. I started volunteering on weekends, mentoring at-risk youth. I went back to therapy even when I felt fine because maintenance matters. I wrote. I shared my story anonymously on a forum. The responses overwhelmed me. Messages from strangers who said my words helped them leave, helped them heal, helped them hope. I wasn't alone. None of us are. And that realization that no matter how deeply you're wounded, someone else has stood where you stand and found a way to move forward, was the beginning of everything. I stopped asking why Rachel did what she did. I stopped replaying what I could have done differently. Instead, I started asking myself better questions. What do I want now? Who am I becoming? What kind of life do I deserve? And slowly, one sunrise at a time, I began to answer them, not with words, but with action. Healing, real healing, isn't marked by dramatic declarations or cinematic montages of recovery. It's quiet, often invisible. It's found in the small victories. When you wake up and don't immediately feel the weight of betrayal on your chest. When you make dinner for yourself and realize you're no longer setting two plates out of habit. When you laugh, genuinely laugh for the first time in what feels like forever. That was how my new life began, slow, steady, and sacred. After months of therapy, reflection, and solitude, I began seeing myself again. Not the shattered man staring into the void on D-Day, but the version of me that existed long before Rachel and long before the betrayal. This version had dreams. He had grit. He had humor and kindness and flaws, sure, but he also had a light that dimmed in the shadows of someone else's deception. I was determined to bring that light back. The first step wasn't forgiving Rachel. That came later. The first step was forgiving myself for staying too long, for loving too blindly, for not trusting my instincts. Shame is heavy. It disguises itself as introspection, but all it does is trap you in a loop. So I broke it. Every time I felt that familiar voice whisper, "You should have seen it coming," I replaced it with, "You saw it, and you acted. You survived." I began documenting my journey, not for social media likes or validation, but to make sense of the chaos. I wrote late into the night, pouring my heart onto paper, rediscovering the power of storytelling. Eventually, I published my story anonymously on a support forum. The messages I received changed my life. Men and women alike poured out their hearts in return. Stories of betrayal, survival, and rebirth. We weren't alone. None of us were. Something shifted in me then. I wasn't just healing, I was becoming a lighthouse for others. That sense of purpose became my compass. I also threw myself into new experiences. I learned to cook, not survival meals, but real recipes that took time and care. I enrolled in a ceramics class, something I'd always wanted to try but never had the courage to. There was something symbolic in shaping clay with my hands, molding something broken into something whole. Each dish I cooked, each mug I glazed, was a small act of reclamation. Max, my rescue dog, became my best friend. We hiked trails I didn't know existed around Miami, chased sunrise views, and napped on the couch after long walks. He didn't ask questions or offer advice. He was just there, steady, loyal, everything I used to believe marriage would be. Around 6 months post-divorce, I reconnected with my younger self. His humor, his curiosity, his unshakable belief that life had more in store. I stopped measuring time by how long it had been since Rachel left, and started measuring it by how far I had come. I felt stronger, lighter, a version of myself I didn't even know I'd missed. One evening I stood in front of the mirror shirtless, examining the scars. Not physical ones, but the emotional toll that etched itself into my posture, my expression, my eyes. I whispered to my reflection, "You did it. You made it through." And I meant it. Then came the unexpected, the possibility of love again. It started innocently enough, a barista at my local coffee shop who remembered my order, who laughed at my bad puns, who asked about Max. Her name was Clara. She had kind eyes and a warmth that reminded me of autumn. I wasn't looking for anything, but connection has a funny way of sneaking in when your heart is finally quiet enough to notice. We went on slow dates. No pressure. Walks with Max, museum visits, late-night conversations about favorite books and worst fears. I told her about Rachel. Not the gory details, but enough to explain the careful pace I was keeping. She didn't flinch. She listened. She respected my boundaries. And slowly, gently, my heart opened again. It wasn't a fairy tale. There were moments I panicked, moments I pulled away, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But Clara never made me feel like a burden. She gave me space to heal, not on her timeline but mine. She wasn't there to fix me. She just stood beside me as I did the work myself. Eventually, I introduced her to my parents. My dad liked her immediately. My mom cried afterward and said, "She reminds me of the way you used to look at Rachel. Except this time I think it's safer." It didn't erase the past. Nothing could. But it proved something crucial. The past didn't get to decide the rest of my story. Now, a full year since that day, I opened my bedroom door and saw the life I thought I knew unravel. I stand in a place I never imagined whole. Not because I was never broken, but because I rebuilt myself piece by piece. I don't hate Rachel. I don't wish her harm. I hope she found whatever it was she was searching for. Even if it wasn't me, what I found was myself. And that's worth everything. Because in the end, healing isn't about forgetting the people who hurt you. It's about remembering the person you were before they did. And honoring the strength it took to return to him. That is my story. That is my rise. And this time I'm not falling back down. There comes a moment in every broken story where silence speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. It's the stillness after the storm, when the dust settles, the tears dry, and what's left standing is not what used to be, but what's left to build from. That's where I find myself now. Not as the man I was when I met Rachel. Not even the man I was when I caught her in our bed with someone else. But as the man who emerged from the ashes of something once beautiful, now burned and buried. For those of you who followed this story from the beginning, you know this wasn't just about a marriage ending. This was about an identity unraveling, a life redefined, a man facing the one thing he never thought he'd have to survive. Betrayal from the person he trusted most. Rachel was never just my wife. She was my best friend, my chosen family, my forever. We didn't have the kind of love you find in romantic comedies. Ours was real, built on rituals, sacrifices, and plans that stretched far into the future. We dreamed of children, of growing old together, of simpler days when we could laugh at the same inside jokes for the 100th time. And for a while it worked. Our love was quiet but fierce, steady but passionate, until it wasn't. Looking back, the signs were there. Subtle cracks in the foundation that I ignored because I wanted to believe love was enough. That commitment could bridge any distance. That loyalty would keep temptation at bay. I was wrong. The transformation started innocently enough. A shared health scare. A joint fitness journey. We reshaped our bodies believing we were shaping a better future. But in the process, we unknowingly began shaping ourselves into different people. people who no longer fit into the same frame. Rachel grew bolder, more confident. Her smile returned, but it wasn't for me. It was for Jake, a man who had entered our lives as a fitness coach and somewhere along the way became something more to her. He represented everything I wasn't. Physically, maybe emotionally, and while I tried to dismiss my insecurities to rationalize the changes, deep down I felt it. The distance, the detachment, the subtle betrayal of her eyes when they stopped looking at me with the warmth I once knew. When I finally saw the truth, the physical proof, the hotel, the lies, the moans that weren't for me, I didn't just lose a wife. I lost a decade. I lost the version of myself that believed I was enough. I lost the home we built. Not in bricks and furniture, but in routines, memories, and promises whispered under blankets late at night. And yet here I am, not just breathing but becoming, because that's the thing about rock bottom. It becomes the strongest foundation for your comeback. The days that followed D-Day were a blur of anger, numbness, and denial. I questioned everything, what I did wrong, what I didn't see, how I could have stopped it. But slowly I realized, I wasn't the villain in this story. I wasn't even the victim. I was the survivor, the one who stayed loyal, the one who kept trying, the one who loved fully, even when love wasn't being returned. I chose healing, not revenge, not bitterness, not self-pity. I started going to therapy. I took up kickboxing not to learn how to fight others but to fight for myself. I adopted a dog, Sammy, whose unconditional love reminded me that affection doesn't always come with strings attached. I moved out of the apartment that once echoed with betrayal and into a space I could finally call mine, not ours. And in that silence I learned something sacred. You don't need closure from the one who hurt you. You create your own closure the moment you decide you deserve peace more than you need answers. Rachel tried to come back. She cried. She wrote letters. She begged. She offered everything from a second chance to an open relationship, claiming she had changed. And maybe she had. Maybe she did feel regret. Maybe Jake wasn't the happily ever after she thought he'd be. Maybe the weight of her choices finally caught up with her. But here's the truth I clung to in those moments. Just because someone regrets hurting you doesn't mean they deserve another chance to do it again. Forgiveness, yes, but not access. I had to learn to differentiate between love and attachment, between memories and reality, between what we had and what we had become. There was a time I thought I couldn't live without her, that I would die alone if I let go. But standing here now I realize, I wasn't afraid of losing her. I was afraid of facing life without the crutch of the familiar. I was afraid of walking alone, but walking alone taught me that solitude is not the enemy. Settling is. So what's the lesson here? What can someone else take away from this story of heartbreak, betrayal, and unexpected rebirth? Here it is. 1. Trust your intuition. That gut feeling you get when something feels off? It's rarely wrong. Love can blind you, hope can lie to you, but your body knows, your spirit knows. Don't silence the warning signs just because you fear the truth. Never lose yourself loving someone else. Compromise is healthy, sacrifice is noble, but losing your voice, your value, your self-worth? That's not love. That's codependence. Love should amplify you, not erase you. Healing is messy, but it's worth it. There's no straight line to recovery. You'll have days where the grief feels heavier than ever, and others where you'll surprise yourself with how far you've come. Be patient, be gentle, but keep going. Closure comes from within. You don't need their apology. You don't need them to acknowledge your pain. What you need is to choose peace. Choose to stop reopening the wound. Choose to say, this chapter is over. I deserve a new one. 5. Become the person you were meant to be. Let this be your moment, not just of survival but transformation. Take the pain and turn it into purpose. Let it fuel your goals, your growth, your greatness. Today, I look in the mirror and I see someone I respect. Not because I'm flawless but because I made it through hell and came back standing. I learned to love myself in the absence of being loved by someone else. I found strength I didn't know I had, and I rebuilt a life that feels authentically mine. I still believe in love, but this time I won't chase it. I won't beg for it. I won't compromise myself for the illusion of it. I will wait for the kind of love that shows up, stays, and chooses me even on the hard days. If you're still reading this, still watching, still listening, it's because a part of you needed this. Maybe you're at the start of your story. Maybe you're in the messy middle. Or maybe you're at your own version of D-Day, wondering if you'll ever feel whole again. You will. Not overnight, not all at once, but slowly, steadily, stronger, just like I did. And if this story meant something to you, if you saw yourself in my pain, my journey, my recovery, then I ask one simple thing. Support this channel, subscribe, share, comment, help this space continue to exist. Not just for me, but for everyone who's searching for hope in the ruins of heartbreak. Because stories like these matter. Because someone out there right now is crying into their pillow thinking they're alone. Let's remind them they're not. Thank you for walking this road with me. And remember, what breaks you can also build you, only if you let it.